Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected expert in renewable energy from the world of academia, from Finland, Mr. Christian Breyer. Christian, welcome to the show.
Hello, Ashutosh. It's a great pleasure to be in the podcast, and it's my pleasure to report on renewables and all related topics from an
Thank you.
academic point of view.
Thank you. Uh, Professor Breyer is the professor for solar economy, LUT University in Finland. His major expertise is the integrated research of technological and economic characteristics of renewable energy, systems specializing in energy system modeling for 100% renewable energy on a global scale. So, Christian, before we get into renewable energy, tell me about your own journey in brief and what got you interested in the area of renewable energy.
Yeah, many thanks for this question. It started, I would say, 25 years ago.
Hmm.
That time I did a career in an accounting company, something
Okay.
completely different. But I wanted to switch for something with purpose, and I identified renewable energies.
Hmm.
And as a consequence, with this economic background, I started to become a physicist
Mm.
and, in the second step, energy systems engineer.
Mm.
And after several years in photovoltaic industry, I came back to academia and fully focus on a sustainable energy transition from a global local resolution.
Amazing. So let's talk about renewable energy transition and sustainability now. What are some of the most promising technologies driving the transition to 100% renewable energy systems?
Yeah, I would say the most important 5 to 7 technologies, depending where in the world we are.
Mm.
The most important of everything is solar photovoltaics. The next most relevant from today's point of view are batteries. The
Mhm.
third one is wind power. Fourth one, electrolyzers. Fifth one, you might be surprised, CO2 direct air capture.
Uh-huh.
And then, depending where in the world we are, grids. Typically, grids are important everywhere, but in some parts of the world more, in others
Mm.
less.
Mm.
More means if there is more wind power, more hydropower in the system, then grids are even more important. If
Mm.
it's solar dominated, it's less important because solar is everywhere available. And if it's a colder environment, then heat pumps are very important for
Mm.
efficient use of the electricity for heat supply.
Mm. Well said. And what are the main barriers, in your view, that prevent a quicker global adoption of 100% renewable energy?
Nowadays, it's not anymore technology. Technology is available, can be scaled, can be grown very fast. It's
Mhm.
even not anymore economics, depending on the field. At least for
Mm.
direct electrification, economics are nowadays outstanding, and one can see that documented in the very, very high growth rates of solar photovoltaics, of batteries. However, we have a lot of policy restrictions, I would say, administrative restrictions,
Mhm.
massively vested interests of those who do not adopt to the new energy world quickly.
Mm. Mm.
So they block it down, but very often these are very powerful stakeholders. And in many parts of the world, I would still call it corruption. It
Mm.
can be legal corruption because it's allowed due to laws, but still it's from an ethical, moral point of view corruption,
Mhm.
or it's simple illegal corruption.
Mm.
And we see that all over the world. Nowadays, I would say we see very strong right-wing, extremist, populistic how to say, trends all around the world, in all different parts in the world.
Yeah.
What they all have in common, they hate renewables. And
Amazing.
they deny climate change typically.
Yeah.
But climate change is one of the key drivers also for renewables. Nowadays, maybe the
Correct.
most relevant driver is even costs,
Correct.
because it's simply very low cost.
Mm.
And due to that, it's in favor for those investing countries or individuals. But extremists and populistic people typically don't support renewables. Well, there are
Mm.
exceptions,
Mm.
so I would not like to ignore that. But the general tendency is they block and slow down renewables.
Mm. Amazing. And how can 100% renewable energy systems help achieve net zero emissions?
Yeah, maybe let's separate the term net zero to, first
Hmm.
of all, zero emissions,
Yeah,
because net zero means we still have some emissions and do some have some additional sinks somewhere else. It can be
right.
natural sinks. Just think on having more trees, more forests, so then we would have more natural things as well. It can be artificial, human-made technical things, so that could be direct air capture, for instance. However, the first step has to be always to defossilize our energy system.
Mm.
So to get rid of the fossil fuels, which is, I would say, from a societal point of view, a drug, and we are
Right.
strongly addicted to that
Mm.
drug. And if we see currently, so we are mid-January, see the pictures in Los Angeles, this is the consequence.
Mm.
So finally, we pay a very high price. In other parts in the world, we have extreme droughts, extreme heat waves. Just take it in South Asia. We
Mm.
can have extreme floods everywhere in the world,
Yeah.
extreme hurricanes. All that becomes stronger.
Mm.
So we have to get rid of our drugs, and these are fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal. And I think the direct replacement, substitution of these kind of drugs with fossil fuels, with renewables, this is the way forward. And
Mm.
we know that from power sector, from heat supply. Nowadays, we have fast growth in the transport sector with electric vehicles, and of course, electricity then
Mm.
from renewable sources.
Mm.
I think that's the way forward, and these are maybe even the low-hanging fruits. And the more challenging part is then when we have to go for indirect electrification. So where electricity cannot be the direct solution, just take aviation fuels for international flights from one continent to another, international marine shipping, think on the chemical industry. So there we need a chemical compound. However, it can start with electricity. In the end, we typically need electricity, water, and air. With electricity, we can split water into hydrogen and oxygen. The hydrogen we need plus typically a carbon source, CO2, and then we get hydrocarbons that we can use as fuel or chemical.
Mm.
And then this is really also net zero, a closed loop, but I would call it a direct net zero. And that, to be honest, we have to achieve as soon as possible. The carbon budget for the 1.5 degree target, as agreed on in the Paris Agreement, was used 2 years ago
Mm.
for only 83% probability. And as we know from latest news, we live in a world with 1.6 degree. So we are beyond the target. So we cannot reach this target. And this is most important, the target in
Mm.
a direct way anymore. We already have to accept the overshoot and then rebalance with net negative emissions. And just to be aware of, 1.5 degree means flooding of most major coastal
Yeah.
cities or regions in the world,
Mm.
because we cannot avoid anymore melting of huge volumes of ice.
Correct.
Just take the ice shield on Greenland and others. It may take decades, maybe even centuries, but physically it's a built-in effect. Due to
Mm.
that, we have to cool down as
Yeah.
soon as possible.
Very
And
well
to
said.
cool down, of course, first of all new CO2 emissions have to be stopped. And I
Yeah.
think this is the most important task in the years, maybe next 15, 20 years to come, to be
Mm.
realistic.
Mm. Great response. But another perspective I wanted to ask you was that in two of the major countries, India and China, both these countries still very heavily dependent on coal. More than 50% of power consumption or energy consumption is still coming from coal. How do you see these big countries beginning to transition to renewable energy?
First of all, the good news is that both India and China don't have substantial own oil and gas resources. So
Yeah.
we only talk on coal. That's the good
Okay.
news. So the consequence is that the transport sector will be fixed very soon, because
Mm.
both countries cannot afford import of the oil, and the international geopolitical tensions and consequences of importing oil for more than 1 billion people.
Mm.
That simply doesn't work. So this is
Mm.
already the good news. You mentioned coal directly. Look to both countries. Millions of people are dying due to air pollution. So coal is
Mm.
simply not the way forward.
Yeah.
It's also very expensive, as we know. The break even in India and China is all in the past that importing coal is more costly than expanding renewables in the country, and depending what kind of subsidies are included or not included, domestic renewable sources, typically solar, is lower in cost in both countries. I know scientific papers and consultancy reports for both countries clearly concluding solar cost less even than existing coal-fired power plants. So the business of the existing plants is just crashing. The consequence is that even building new coal-fired power plants is economically wasting resources and bringing the companies or players investing there into massive financial trouble. It will never pay off. The way forward is really renewables. In both countries, it's largely solar, maybe in India a bit more wind power. In India, wind power is quite attractive for balancing the monsoon. We know in the months of the monsoon, wind power is just excellent, but not in the other 9 months of the year. Hydropower is also quite good, but it's largely used. And maybe on top of that, we know that water is a very limited resource, and we should not misuse it to just get it evaporated with cooling thermal power plants. This is the most stupid way of using a very limited resource, to be honest.
Well said. Let's now talk about energy storage and smart grid technology. And my first question in this area is, what are the most exciting advancements in energy storage, particularly in battery and hydrogen technologies?
Yeah, I would say the most important is what happened in the last 18 months, that prices of batteries brutally crashed. Crashed means minus 60% of prices. Nowadays, they're at the edge to be called low cost. So at least I would say they're very well affordable. Maybe low cost is the next step. Depending on market rumors you take, it's already low cost or it is the next step. I think the very good news of the recent past is, first of all, we can or could get rid of largely the very limited critical materials as cobalt. So for lithium ion batteries, cobalt is not anymore a need, maybe except very special applications. So with lithium iron phosphate batteries, nowadays roughly 40 to 50% of all new battery electric vehicles already use that. In stationary applications, it's the default anyway. So that's very important to get rid of the dependency of cobalt. Now is the question, does the world have enough lithium? This is an open question. It finally depends. Will the world end up in 2 billion, 2.5, 3, or 5 billion cars? No one knows exactly. This makes the difference whether we have enough lithium or not. In principle, we would have enough in the oceans. There's huge volumes of lithium in the oceans, but we have not yet found a cost-effective way to get it extracted from there due to the very, how to say, high dilution of the salt in the ocean. However, I would say a major news of the last, let's say, 1-2 years is that sodium-ion batteries are now fully available. The large battery manufacturers in the world introduced them. The first automotive companies introduced it even as batteries for cars. Their feature is more or less similar to lithium-ion battery. Energy density slightly below, but very close to lithium iron phosphate battery, so no big difference. And the best news, I would say, is that they can be produced on the same manufacturing lines as lithium ion technology. So that is just a drop-in technology. So to cut a long story short, the battery topic as a maybe discussed limitation for the energy transition is just off the table. So this is fixed. And I think this is the most important message.
Very well said.
When it comes to hydrogen, I would say there's still some homework is to be done. We have understood that hydrogen is the second most important energy carrier in future, next to electricity and based on electricity. But no one is really interested directly in hydrogen, because hydrogen we need to produce fuels and chemicals. We talk on ammonia, methanol, jet fuel. So these are the most relevant ones. From a direct use, I would say steel industry. There is most important to do the direct reduction of iron, so substituting coal with hydrogen for steel industry. Otherwise, we need it here and there for some seasonal storage, but we talk on less than 1% of the annual electricity demand that would be needed for hydrogen storage. So this is a rather small market. So due to that, I would even regroup hydrogen not to a storage group, but to a group of transition energy carriers to transfer electricity via hydrogen into the e-fuels and chemicals we really need in really hard to abate sectors. What is really needed for the hydrogen business, that we have reliable, low-cost electrolyzers in huge volume available. Currently, this market is in transition, I would say. Globally, a lot of hydrogen projects are on hold due to limitation in low-cost bulk electricity and low-cost available electrolyzers. So maybe this has to be debottlenecked, most importantly, in the quarters to come.
Fascinating, fascinating. And how do you envision the future of vehicle-to-grid technology in the renewable energy space?
Yeah, that will be very important, but smart EV charging is more important. So we talk a lot of vehicle to grid, so how vehicles could stabilize, support the grid and function as a storage. I think that's very important, but even more important is that electric vehicles are grid connected as much as possible, and when low-cost electricity is available, that they get fully charged. I think this is the most important. That has been found in quite many studies, that maybe the value of the grid integration of battery electric vehicles is 80% the smart charging, but never forget, of course, the vehicle to grid. That's very important. And with the grid connection of cars, with a well communication tool and platforms, this still has to be partly created, but I think we are well on the way. Then frequency containment regulation can be also very well done, because this is just a kind of a huge power capacity in the system where we can massively stabilize the frequency of the grid. So we have much better and stable grids as we have today with a thermal regulation. And of course, as a storage, it's quite convenient. So if you have very low-cost batteries, we may have larger batteries in cars. And let's assume 10-20% of the capacity of a battery, maybe for 80-90% on average on the year is used for that, would be just wonderful. And we have further, we call it then vehicle to X solution. So you can have vehicle to home, for instance. You can use it also for powering homes, and maybe just in off-grid environments to run appliances for work outside. So even that's possible.
Amazing, amazing. And can advancements in artificial intelligence and machine learning accelerate the deployment of smart grids?
In principle, I would say yes. So if we have a lot of data and can interpret our data better for a better use, then I would fully agree. But I would not assume that artificial intelligence is the key tipping point to get renewables further. So if we have it as a supporting tool, it's nice. If by accident it would not work, we would not miss something. But of course, it's supportive as other digital services as well.
Absolutely, well said. So let's talk about the third part of our conversation, which is on energy economics and policy. And I've got 2 or 3 questions for you here. What economic advantages do decentralized renewable energy systems offer compared to centralized systems?
I guess the most important in the inner core is to have a more resilient energy system in total, because it's just distributed on more shoulders. This is the one thing. The second aspect is it's a more fair system, so more can contribute and participate. So we know that from more and more countries that end users, that are individual people, families, companies, smaller companies, larger companies, they can manage large parts of their business finally from the energy supply point of view on their own. So this brings also more reliability to the system and more responsibility also to others. So it's a kind of a shared economy from that point of view. And that might be for decision makers and policy makers a kind of a new normal that more contributes to speak as long as it's allowed. But it seems that it cannot be blocked or it's not blocked. So
Right.
it's spreading around the world, independent of the economic system, of the policy system, because technology just works always the same. I think that's a big advantage. But of course, we also need new tools how to manage then. I would not call it chaotic systems, but very large systems with a lot of interaction of smaller and larger participants. So that works well. We know that from all different kind of regions in the world that technically that's not a big deal. So it's maybe more a political question how to organize that. But in the end, we have to be fair. So it has to be a fair new opportunity to run our energy systems, because we saw in too many countries that the 1% of the super rich rob the resources of the others, and this is
Right.
not fair. Here we have an opportunity to counterbalance that, at least partly.
Well said. Christian, I have time for two more questions. What role do subsidies and government incentives play in the rapid expansion of renewable energy?
I would nowadays conclude a harmful role because the subsidies are the problem for fossil fuel and nuclear fuel
Correct.
usage. So if those unfair subsidies for fossil nuclear fuels will be removed, we would see a more stable and better, faster growing business for renewables. So this is the general point of view. Where we still may need some support is less subsidies, it's more fair and good regulation so that new renewable sources get a fair chance. This might be blocked here and there with old rules. And in the hard to abate sectors, I think we do need support. They're explicitly talking on e-fuels and e-chemicals, which has partly to do that there is no CO2 pricing in the existing solutions, fossil solutions. So of course, that's very often a problem. Air pollution is not factored in. So we have several million people dying around the world due to air pollution induced by fossil fuels burning typically, but it's not priced in. Why? So there could be a cost for, first of all, to finance the health issues of the many, many million people more who have health problems due to that. But of course, it would further improve the economics of renewables. So we have a problem with subsidies, but people still think it's a problem with subsidies for renewables. No, it's subsidies for fossil fuels. And we know from the International Monetary Fund that subsidies for fossil fuels all put together is nowadays more than $6,000 billion every single year.
Wow.
That's really a problem. And this is the order of the global expenditures for the global health of more than 8 billion people. This is just stupid.
Amazing.
So I think removing those subsidies, that would bring us massively further. But for e-fuels and e-chemicals, it would be really important to have some support just to accelerate the phase-in.
Amazing. And my last question for you, given all the work that you do with so many different countries in this area, what lessons can countries that have successfully transitioned to high levels of renewable energy share with the rest of the world?
Be open-minded and ignore fossil lobbying. That's the most important. And trust in the power of the people, because people can drive massively the transition if they're allowed to, putting PV batteries in their own premises. And this also creates new business opportunities. So new companies are created, new business arise, new opportunities arise. And of course, learn from regulative improvements from other countries. So some new features are learned in a particular part in the world for the first time. And then, of course, it helps how they have fixed the problem, how they have solved it. And that may accelerate an adaptation somewhere else. Just to take an example, We had very unstable grids in South Australia years ago due to not well functioning grids and thermal power plants. That was fixed with batteries, and they had massively better frequency stability. And that we now see in other parts in the world. A latest example is California. They had now more than 100 days in the last year with at least some time of the day 100% renewables.
Wow.
And with batteries, that obviously worked very well.
Mm.
So this is another hotspot in the world where we can learn how it works. And if someone wants to understand how it works with wind power, maybe collaboration with Denmark, for instance, will be quite interesting. Because they have the by far highest share of wind power in their energy system, around about 50% growing. So there one can learn a lot. Battery electric vehicles, how it works in the system, one can study in Norway. How it works with heat pumps, one can start in the Nordic countries. How to ramp entirely new industries, one can start or study in India and in China. Where this was done very fast, I think on battery electric vehicles, batteries, solar PV technology. So they are so broadly distributed, excellent experience around the world, just learning from one another and in a way that we positively, kindly collaborate.
Amazing. And on that note, Christian, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your incredible journey from accounting to an expert in solar energy. Thank you for speaking to me about three different aspects that we covered today: renewable energy transition and sustainability, energy storage and smart grid technology, and energy economics and policy. And the two powerful messages that you have given is that, governments around the world are subsidizing almost $6,000 billion, which is almost $6 trillion for fossil fuel, and that should really be stopped. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Ashutosh, many thanks, and it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.